Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's session of our Working Parent Club. I think some of you will know we run these every month. We have a different topic every single month. We've had some brilliant speakers, and we are not going to let you down today. Today, we've got Aniki Somerville joining us. Full disclosure here, Aniki used to work at Bubble and is a great friend of Bubble and a wonderful speaker. A fantastic writer. She is an author of several books. I'm sure she'll talk about that more in a moment. She's also a brilliant marketeer and works for a very interesting company called Jude at the moment, having left Bubble last year. I'm really excited on the topic we are discussing today because it's something that certainly resonates with me. I've got 3 kids, and every day I feel like I am losing my marbles at least 5 times. So really hoping, Aniki, you're going to solve that for us all today. And tomorrow will be an easier day. But I'll hand over to you now. I'm sure I'm going to chip in with all sorts of questions along the way, but really excited to get going.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, so what I've done is essentially, I recently wrote a book which was predominantly around kind of how to navigate work. But I think it's no secret that being a working parent is probably one of the most challenging things that you can take on. So I've tried to sort of pull together this session, really thinking about some tips, sort of practical things that I've learned along the way. What I don't want to imply is that I've got it sussed, because I think whenever you feel like you're kind of on top of it, that's often when parenting or work will throw you a kind of curveball and the whole thing is kind of turned upside down. So I want to be very clear that I'm still one of those people that's kind of navigating all the time. One of my very first pieces of advice actually is around the notion of a morning routine. Now in our household, we basically sort of have a household where my partner leaves for work very early. And so I have both of the kids and I'm getting ready for work. I think what's quite common when I talk to other working parents is that early morning is often like a bit of a triggering time, because you're trying to get kids ready for school or childcare. You're trying to get yourself ready for work. And many of us tend to just wake up and almost immediately that to-do list starts to run through our head of the stuff that we've got on that day. And that really creates that kind of perfect storm where you think any moment now, I am going to become a shouty parent. I'm feeling really overwhelmed and it's very hard. Now, I'm not being too trite here, and I'm going to ask you, Sarah, whether you agree or not, and feel free to disagree. One of the key sort of things that I've learned is actually to bank a little bit of time for myself in the morning. So I try and wake up a little bit earlier than they do. I try not to reach for my phone. I try and leave my phone downstairs. And one of the first things I do actually is, if I've got that to-do list, which is running through my head, I just try and write some of it out on a bit of paper. And I think there's been loads of studies that have shown actually that journaling, and in particular early morning kind of journaling, it's almost the equivalent of just doing a brain dump. Dump that stuff down on a piece of paper and then get ready to go and assume your kind of role as a parent. The other thing that I'm a big fan of, which I know could be controversial, is that I definitely have TV on in the morning. So I know a lot of parents will say that's not good for children. I was listening to Mylene Class actually talking on a podcast about how she does music practice in the morning. And I was thinking, that's brilliant. I really admire that. But I need to have the telly on for a little while. And again, this is another little tip that I found really useful. I try and do 15 to 20 minutes of movement. And that's just an online exercise class. So I'm not doing like high level Pilates. I am basically just jumping around the kitchen for 20 minutes. And the objective there actually is, I suppose, just trying to integrate a little bit of self-care for myself in the morning, knowing that that's going to set me up for the day and hopefully result in me shouting less at children, but also sending those kind of maybe slightly passive aggressive messages to work. So I know, Sarah, you run, don't you, in the morning?
I'm very lucky that I can run to work. So I have that kind of, which is actually a real buffer for me that I can do, because I am quite shouty in the morning, I will admit. In fact, I'm very shouty in the morning. I've got 3 kids to get ready. We have exactly an hour to do it, and it can get quite noisy. But I love your suggestion around making lists. I think lists are such a good exercise. And actually, sometimes I make quite visible lists. So we have a whiteboard on our fridge. I'm making lists, so I don't feel it's just in my head. It's sort of somehow giving some kind of joint responsibility to all the things that need to happen on that particular day.
I know. I think lists are brilliant, and I still really prefer. Like, I've got a massive notebook in front of me at the moment, and as much as I do work on my phone, I do find sometimes just writing it out on a piece of paper. I think if an outsider looked at them, they'd think they were kind of the rants of a crazy person, because a lot of them don't make sense. But there are like little things like need to get brownie uniform or must book that play date. But as they pop up in my brain, I write them down, and I think a lot of working parents will say that they have this constant ticker tape of stuff. And that does contribute to this sense of feeling very overwhelmed. And you've got to acknowledge that when you come to work, you bring your entire self to work. You don't just leave the parent self at the door and come in and suddenly you're very professional. You bring all of that other stuff. So as much as you can almost keep a bit of a boundary between the two, that really, really helps. One of my other tips actually sounds really trite, but I've kind of invested in nice shower gels, and this was because I read Anya Hindmarsh's book, which was around how it's always good to basically wash your hair, like if in doubt, wash your hair. And I know a lot of women rely heavily, in particular, on dry shampoo on a bad week, and I find that my hair gets bigger as the week goes on, depending on how stressed I am, because I'm just adding layers of dry shampoo on. But a nice shower gel, if again, it's just trying to create these little windows where you're kind of feeling more human again. So even if you have had a bit of a shouty outburst, you're kind of like, okay, I'm calm back down again. Aromatherapy, anything that's got lavender in it, bring me back into myself again. Because we when we're navigating really tough emotions, most of it is because we're almost having these out of body experiences where we're kind of leaving our body because we're so stressed and overwhelmed, and all of those kind of things will try to get us back into our body. And I'm going to ask you, Sarah, about this other thing that I tend to do, which is on a Sunday night I prepare the night before. So I like to put out the kids' clothes and my clothes if I can, and at least check, because they both want to have packed lunch at the moment, which is a pain in the bum. So I try and at least check in the fridge. I try and anticipate again. So I've identified mornings as being a bad time. So I'm kind of like, what are the steps that I can take to really make sure that the morning is a bit smoother than it might be? And even like, we have a basket with shoes in, and all of the shoes are all piled on top. They're all full of sand and stuff. The night before, I might even just try and pick the shoes out. And all I'm doing is I'm thinking, let me just have a slightly smoother morning. So a bit of pre-planning night before.
Yeah, I try and give myself an hour on a Sunday afternoon to do life admin, basically, because I feel like I'm set up. So for me, it's booking breakfast clubs, booking after school clubs, trying to remember if I paid for karate or chess club or whatever it is. But I try, and I'm just, because I think, we all kind of get that sort of Sunday afternoon stress, don't we? And if I know that I've got an hour just to basically sort really boring stuff. Actually, another one from the Anya Hindmarsh book, she talks about this as well, that if you give yourself a bit of time then. And also I try and get my partner involved in those conversations and try and divvy up some of the responsibilities between us, so we know who's looking after which section of the week, who's going to do which pickups. And if we can get that sorted on Sunday, it does tend to make me slightly less stressed for the rest of the week.
Yeah, I think that is a really good tip. My next kind of thing is around this area of burnout. And I don't know whether, I feel like that's a term that's being bandied around a lot, but I think probably if we look at people who are prone to it, it's quite oftentimes, I suppose, parents, so men and women, but I hear it a lot more from mothers in particular. And one of the stats that kind of slightly dismayed me was that, and I think this can't be true, but it was saying something like women tend to do 31 hours of housework each week. So there's obviously been lots of articles and studies published around the amount of unpaid work that women are doing at home. So they tend to be doing their paid job, and then they're doing all the stuff like putting the wash on, hanging it up, ordering food, organizing play dates. There's a whole realm of other things as well. And we do sometimes have a tendency to live in a culture at the moment which is all about productivity. So if you're someone who has got an awful lot of unpaid work, and you're getting the message from a culture which is kind of saying you need to be productive all the time, and unless you're not actually deemed as being successful unless you're productive all the time, then actually that's a perfect recipe for being burnt out. And the reason I can talk about burnout, I mean, I do talk about it in the book, and I interviewed someone who had a really bad experience with it, was that I did end up in A&E once. And I can only now reflect on it, that it was a Saturday morning. I went in because I I suppose I just had these overwhelming feelings that I couldn't cope anymore. And I was feeling physically very sick. And I realized that what it was I was burnt out. And funny enough, the doctor looked at me. I had very high blood pressure. And the sense of relief I had, because he literally said to me, he looked at me, he took my blood pressure, he went, "You are very, very stressed out. You know, I can tell that just from looking at you." And I think one of the problems that had happened is that I'd become so overwhelmed with work and the unpaid work that I was doing. And I suppose we're all coming out still. I hate to talk about the C word, but the COVID. Some people I talk to are only now experiencing some of those symptoms, almost like it's taken them a little bit of time to absorb what's happened. And then what we've come up for air, and then suddenly have been deluged by all the stuff that's happening in the broader world as well. So, you know, the economy, you know, the fuel shortages, all the other things. So my main bit of advice is try and get better at spotting those signs of burnout. And in the book, I sort of list some of them, but one of the classic ones, actually, especially in a work context, is seeing things in a completely out of perspective kind of way. So for example, a good example would be that you receive a bit of feedback from somebody. Instead of being able to take that feedback on board, you then create a narrative in your head where you essentially say, okay, I am a complete failure. I don't know, you know, I can't do this job. It's obvious that they've spotted I'm incompetent, you know, and then you go down a very negative kind of train of thought. And this is driven a lot by feeling tired and overwhelmed. And I think we need to be our best kind of advocates, I guess, and actually be able to take a step back and go, okay, am I reacting normally here? And one of my bits of advice actually would be reach out to a friend, have somebody on your phone, be it a family member or a friend, where you can just say, listen, this is something that's happened at work. I totally feel like it's the end of the world. Hopefully they'll be the kind of friend that will be able to say, do you know what? It sounds to me like you need to book a holiday, or it sounds to me like you need to book a day off, or it sounds to me like you need to put some boundaries in place, or even rethink your role at the moment. But also it sounds to me like you're catastrophizing. And I don't know, Sarah, whether you've ever been in that situation where it's almost kind of like, you know, in your heart that you've just made a mistake, but there's another part of you which is essentially going down a very negative route, that it kind of has massive implications for your future and God knows what.
Yeah, and I tend to internalize a lot of that stuff. And actually, one thing that you talked about earlier, kind of movement, exercise, is so important for me for that, because like it takes me into some kind of different mental zone where I can kind of get perspective, whatever's going on. And actually, there's a stuff that I've looked into, the kind of freeze or flight thing that you can do, and I do tend to freeze, so I actually have to force myself into some kind of movement, and then I feel like it kind of loosens up everything, including any kind of spiraling thoughts.
Yeah, and it's funny because it feels counterintuitive, because you almost feel you kind of feel incapable of kind of doing anything positive, and there's part of you that kind of really wants to just revel in it. But I think, I mean, Mel Robbins is somebody she's an American kind of self-help author, and she is a bit kind of happy clappy. There may be people out there who are kind of like, oh no, I'm not sure about her. But she does talk very much about taking action. So like sort of when you're feeling a certain way and you're not enjoying that feeling, try and identify one thing that's going to move you towards feeling slightly better. Now, obviously, if you're in a really serious depression, you need to go and see your GP. But if it's literally like, I'm feeling incompetent, I'm feeling low, I'm feeling very sort of unworthy, maybe actually it's just a run that you need, or maybe actually you just need to go and book in a lunch with a friend or a catch up. So I think that's really good to be able to identify those kind of triggers. The other thing is this big thing around kind of boundaries. And I feel like there's such an opportunity now, because we have this technology that allows us to stay in touch with work all the time, but we're not very good at managing the times when we're on and when we're off. So I talk to lots of women who say that while they're watching telly now, they're checking work emails, or when they're on the school run, they're on their phone and they're replying to messages on Slack. Some of that is positive, and I would argue that if you've got your own business and you're working really hard, there are going to be times where you're going to find that actually that's quite useful. You know, it's kind of like, it's quite good that I'm able to multitask. But lots of studies show that multitasking is not particularly effective. And one of the things that I've noticed as well is that it means that you almost do this hybrid hybrid kind of failing at parenting, failing at work, because you're one eye on your kid. Say if you're on the school run, they're running off on their scooter, you're trying to talk to a parent, you're trying to reply to a message, and you're actually failing at all of them. You're not doing the social interaction, you're not keeping the eye on the kid, you're not doing the work thing. So I'm a big fan of kind of setting boundaries around technology. So if that means kind of saying, when I'm on the school run, I'm actually not going to check my phone until I get back again. But also using technology to kind of manage your own schedule. So it's funny, like I like to work really early in the morning, and I used to send emails really early in the morning. I don't know. And then I realized that other people were potentially getting emails at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then I sort of was like, why can't I just schedule things so that basically I'm aligned with them? I'm not setting up that expectation that they're working at 6 o'clock. I like to work early in the morning. It sounds slightly incredible, but basically because my kids are watching television. So I might be quickly responding to things, but now I've got much better at scheduling them. Because what I don't want to do, and in the book I talk quite a lot about this, is if you set the expectation that you're working in certain hours, it's not helpful. So you might feel really resentful because you think, why do people send messages to me at 9 o'clock at night? They do that because you reply at 9 o'clock at night. If you're, why do they also assume that you're working at 6? Well, you've been sending emails at 6. I'm very bad on my non-working day on a Friday, in that I'm always on Slack. So I'm very passive aggressive because I'm kind of like, I'm not working Friday. Oh, but I'm on Slack and I'm replying to things. And so I need to set a boundary around that. So I don't know, Sarah, do you have that in place where you sort of think about this particular times when you make a real effort not to be online so that you can do other things?
I think I am very bad at this, and I really try and be better at this, but I've tried previously to have a kind of 6 till 7 slot, both AM and PM, without my phone. I wish I were better at it. And actually, this is a really good reminder to set that up again, because nothing urgent's happening at 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And actually, those are the times when I do think that my kids need some parenting, basically. And it makes me feel better if I can limit myself at those hours.
Yeah, I think it's so, and I think we all kind of know that, but we don't always follow that advice. I mean, it seemed quite radical to me, but I was talking to someone else and they were saying they just take the apps off their phone, so when they go on holiday, they take Slack off. I felt quite anxious at the thought of that, because I think I like to be able to at least have a background noise of what's going on. But I actually think it's probably good if you can get used to doing things like that and just sort of logging off.
I think that background noise is really dangerous, actually, because it means you're never switching between, you're in one zone completely. So I agree with that person. And on holidays, I do try. That's the sort of thing I do, because that background noise for me is just too noisy.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I think we're entering this stage now where I'm trying to find, like, what's the combination of work and life? It's not wife, but we're basically entering this stage where we're kind of, work is life. It's like it's always there, it's always on, and we're always able to connect with it. And I don't want to be in that stage, but having said that, I am addicted to being productive. And I actually admitted recently that I enjoy it. Like, somebody said to me, you're always working all the time on different things. And I said, but I enjoy it. I get enjoyment from that. And that is my personality. The reason when it starts to get out of hand is when I just try and do too much, probably, and I need to dial it back again. And then the final bit of advice I really had was kind of around just accepting that it's hard. I think the stats are quite stark in terms of, like, 2 out of 5 women are leaving work because of not enough childcare. People feel like they don't have enough time for themselves. I think because of the period of time that we've come out of, a lot of parents are feeling very weary and just feeling like, what, I am knackered. And so it's funny, I was talking recently about the notion of quiet quitting as well. As part of that is that there can be a period of time when, as a parent, you just have to throw your hands in the air and say, yes, I have to work, but I am not going to give 190% to my job at this particular time, because I don't have the physical resources to do that. And you don't tell your boss that, obviously. You don't say, oh, do you know what, for the next 6 months, I'm just treading water, if that's okay. But I think what you do is you try and invest less of yourself emotionally in your job. and try and, as women in particular, I think we do tend to set quite perfectionist standards on ourselves. And I think you have to just start to think, okay, it's okay for this period of time that I am not accelerating in my career. I'm paddling. That's what I'm doing. I'm paddling because I've got young kids. And I think I mentioned this to you before, Sarah. We've got a mutual friend who actually said to me that she said, at the moment, I'm just focusing on parenting. This is a very successful working woman, but psychologically, she's got young kids, and she's like, not guilt tripping anybody, but she's just saying, if I just manage to be a fairly competent parent during this period of time, I'm happy. What I'm not saying is that I need to do that and get a promotion and start climbing up some greasy pole all at the same time. So maybe when the kids start secondary school, that might be a good time for me to start doing that again. But I think that's a lot of what I'm trying to do when I speak to people, is put work in its proper context and don't let it dominate everything, and accept that if you do want to go hard on your career right now and have kids, it's going to be hard, and you're going to have good and bad days, you know.
And Nikki, such wise words, and thank you. I think I needed to hear that today. Really, really interesting. And I'd love to kind of open up to anyone else who's got any questions for Nikki, or any ideas. Actually, that would be really great if anyone's got any hacks. I hate the word hacks. Any ideas where we can share thoughts around how to manage the kind of balance and the boundaries, because I think that's something that is really, really tricky. And I love what you said, Nikki, around how just for how much you actually enjoy being very productive, and like we do have a lot on, and a lot for that for as working parents, you know, it's a good thing, and work is a really important part of identity. And I feel very fortunate that I'm able to work because I'm able to afford the childcare in place. And as you alluded to, a lot of women, more than ever, in fact, which is incredibly depressing to be learning right now, more than ever, women are leaving careers because they can't afford childcare, they can't find the flexibility that they need. So whilst it's this kind of constant cycle of feeling guilty about it, but also feeling very grateful for it, and trying not to completely burn out, as you say, by trying to go 100 miles an hour in every space, in every role that we play as working parents. Has anyone else got any questions for Nikki? I know these sorts of things, people never like to raise their hands very much, but if anyone has got and say, hopefully this is really open discussion, I'm sure people have got some nice ideas that neither Nikki and I have thought of around how to kind of manage and manage being a working parent. I'll go back to my favorite one because it genuinely changed my life, the whiteboard on the fridge. It's so basic, I'm so embarrassed to admit it, but having that to-do list publicly available for my children and my husband to see, so it's not just me knowing that we've got karate on Thursday, and having everything laid out in both a calendar form and a to-do list form. Seriously, best $4.99 I ever spent on Amazon was getting that thing and sticking it on the fridge, because it means that I'm constantly seeing it, so I'm not panicking that's sort of stuck in my head. Also, it feels like I'm sharing that responsibility. And I have friends who are way better at doing this, who really do divvy up responsibilities in a much more kind of processy way between them and their partner. I haven't nailed that yet, but certainly having kind of a visible calendar and schedule and to-do list, I find incredibly helpful. Basic, but life-changing.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing, because that partly tied into that, is saying no to things. Because I suddenly realized that, for example, I only volunteered as the parent, you know, the PSA sort of activity when my eldest was first starting school, and I did a little shift then of maybe a year and a half, and now I suddenly sort of had this realization that if I did that this year, it would be one of those things that pushed me over the edge. And I think that is quite interesting, because it's not that I've said that I'll never do it, but I'm just like, for this moment in time, I'm not going to do it.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I find myself parent repping right now, and it is a hell of a lot of work. And Louise on this call also is someone who volunteers a huge amount for the school, and I've now got 3 kids at school and I feel very responsible for it. I want to help the school, but I am very conscious that I can't give enough, and this is the second time I've done it, and I'm just being a lot kind of stricter with myself, that if things don't happen, it's not going to be the end of the world. But I do think it certainly doesn't bother Mike, doesn't keep my husband awake at night in the same way it keeps me awake at night, that how much parent rep duties I'm taking on. So just an interesting point around kind of gender. And as much as he cares about school, he cares about our kids, but he's not worrying about the Santa's grotto that's got to be set up in the next 4 weeks.
That's it. And I think we tend to feel that guilt that we're not doing that, because you sort of tend to think, do I have that gap in my diary that I could do it? And I'm also around kind of food prep, because I noticed that, we have competitive packed lunch in our school. So we have sort of some mums who are really very, very good at doing packed lunches, and that's great for them. Like I even have a neighbour, in fact, and she's a food writer. She does these amazing sort of like packed lunches for her son. And my daughter gets like a sandwich and a packet of crisps and a Ribena. I don't even actually know if Ribena is allowed, but that's kind of the mix of things. And she quite often will say to me, I didn't get, Korean dim sum in my packed lunch, and I'm really peeved. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but that's just what happens with having a working mum at the moment. I am making up for it in other ways, but I think sometimes we have to disentangle ourselves, because sometimes I can get really annoyed by the fact that other people are doing better at me in other areas. And then I think, but I'm not going to judge myself like that. And one of the best sayings you can have is good for you, not for me. So I've had that a lot with parenting, where I've been, that's lovely that you've managed to hand make all your Halloween costumes from scratch. That's not for me. I am unfortunately going to recycle something from Amazon from last year.
Yeah. You've got to know your strengths. I'm impressed you let your kids have packed lunches. Mine certainly are not allowed. And also my children turn up to school looking a mess. I don't do ironing. You've got to make some rules. They don't brush their hair and they don't do ironing. They're surviving. It's okay. Anyway, on that note of packed lunches and messy hair, it doesn't look like anyone's going to be brave enough to ask any questions, but I hope everyone's found this session super useful. I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed it, even just to kind of share some stresses and strains on our working parent life. We do the sessions every month. Next month we're doing one actually on emotional and social learning for kids. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that all entails, but we've got a really excellent speaker coming to tell us about it, so it should be really enlightening and helpful as well. So if you've got any feedback, always get in touch with me, please come to these events and share your thoughts. It's really, really helpful, and hopefully just half an hour of inspiration and energy on a Wednesday. Thank you so much, Aniki, for your time today. Really, really appreciate it, and lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.